pause before we started. I know that was one of the first pauses I had today. It's probably a busy time for everybody. Like Tia said, my name is Jay Cumberland. I'm an attorney at the Sustainable Economies Law Center, and my focus for the next 2 years is on creating new legal strategies to help workers buy businesses from business owners and convert them into worker cooperatives. And I also focus on helping tenants work to buy their apartment buildings, sometimes alone, sometimes together with community land trust, to convert them into housing cooperatives. So I guess on the whole, my focus is on transitions of ownership for all types of private property, I suppose. I need to give one or two disclaimers before we get rolling. One is that while I am an attorney, I'm not your attorney. So this information is intended to be legal information and not legal advice particular to your situation. So I'd recommend that you not act on this information unless you consult with another attorney, while keeping in mind that most attorneys are perhaps a little bit more risk averse than the attorneys at the Sustainable Economies Law Center. And you should be in charge of that relationship. But I should probably tell you a little bit about us at the Law Center in case you're not familiar with us. We provide legal research, education, advocacy, and advice to create more just and resilient economies. Our goal is to try to get us out of this boom and bust system that keeps showing up in these ecological crises and economic crises, and just create a world that runs a little bit more smoothly and works a little bit better for everybody involved. So learn more about us, look at our website if you haven't yet. And finally, I feel like I should say this just because I saw a few of the people that showed up. This presentation is for workers, and I had a presentation on Tuesday that was specifically for business owners, but there's a little bit of ambiguity as to which presentation is for who. This presentation is geared towards workers that are in businesses where they don't have a good relationship with the business owner. Whether that business owner has exploited them in the past, has created bad working conditions or anything like that. It's primarily geared for workers who would be afraid that if they approach their business owner and said, hey, we want to buy this business, we think that's a way to help this thing survive this crisis, they would be afraid of getting fired or there being retaliation if they took that kind of action. So that's not to say that this presentation won't be useful for workers in other scenarios, workers that have good relationships with their business owners, but it's primarily geared for the other audience. If you're in the group of workers that has a good relationship and wouldn't be afraid to approach your business owner, or even if your business owner has approached you with this as a solution, I'd recommend that you go and watch the presentation from Tuesday in addition to watching this one. That will give you an overview of how to accomplish a conversion in a slightly different way. And do it quickly enough to use it as a solution to this crisis. You can find that on the YouTube page of the Sustainable Economies Law Center. So just type our name into YouTube and you can find that. I'll also share it afterwards as an email. So that was a very long-winded introduction, but let's go. So this presentation at a really basic level involves a few concepts that I want to familiarize people with and make sure that we're on the same page when I'm saying terms that are a little unfamiliar in sort of everyday talking. So one of those is worker ownership. So I want to give a brief explanation of what that is. At a very basic level, it just means that the people that work in a business, or you work in a business and you own the business. So this can apply to small business owners who work in a business and who also own the business. It can apply to tech executives who work in a business and get paid in equity or something like that. This version of the word, or this meaning of the word, is not very often used and is not the sense in which I'm going to be talking about the word during this presentation. I'm primarily going to be talking about it in the sense of a worker cooperative where you work in the business and you own the business, but everyone else who works in the business also owns the business. So that's sort of the term of art, the way it's used in what I'll be talking about today. But I'm also going to be going back and forth between the terms worker ownership and worker control and worker self-management. Worker ownership is a little bit narrower of a concept than worker control and worker self-management. Worker ownership is included within that definition, but it's not the whole thing. So if you'll find experts in worker ownership or worker cooperatives that don't know a lot about the history of worker control or worker self-management, because those terms are tied more closely to labor history, to the history of struggles and contestations within individual businesses to gain more control in those businesses, and in some cases, to gain ownership. So those terms arose sort of within union movements, within labor movements, and when in places where largely ownership was out of reach, in giant factories and things like that, where it was impossible or it seemed far off that they could gain ownership. So they used whatever strategies they could to gain as many rights, to gain better wages, to gain more control. What I'm going to be talking about today is using those strategies from the history of worker control to create not only more control for workers, but also ownership for workers. So I'm talking about the full thing, the works, aka forming a worker cooperative out of an existing business that is just a traditional sort of business. So I don't have a time to do a full introduction to what a worker co-op is, but luckily my coworker Ricardo has been doing that for several years and is really good at it. And he also has a video on our YouTube channel from last week, which is an introduction to cooperatives, just the basics of how you would form them, what it means to operate them, what kind of values are instilled in that framework. So I'd recommend that you watch that if you're wanting to learn more or to talk to your coworkers about what a worker co-op is in general, although I will give a brief introduction to that. One thing that's probably on a lot of people's minds, if you're a worker and you're approaching this issue right now and thinking about this, is the lack of money that's very prevalent right now. I know that 1/3 of Americans, I believe, didn't pay their rent in April. They prefer to use that money to pay for food or to pay for something else. So if people are struggling on unemployment insurance or they're laid off or whatever to pay for basic things, how could you afford to buy a business in this moment? I think that's a very valid question and one that's probably wanting to be addressed at the very beginning. So I talked in the presentation on Tuesday about a different method of financing a transition because more possibilities are opened up when the business owner is on your side and there's a friendly relationship there. So in that presentation, I talked about something called seller financing, which is when the owner of the business loans money to the business to buy out their percentage of the ownership in that business. That's a great method to finance a conversion right now, to finance it quickly, but it's a bad method when you're sort of in a conflictual relationship or a conflicted relationship with the owner, and you wouldn't want them to continue exercising control over you for the next few years. Because typically, when owners finance a conversion, they retain some control of the business, whether they require that they be the manager of the business for a few years, or they can take back the business if you don't make payments. They're not willing to give you the type of financing that you need or the control that you want. You would continue to be in a relationship with them when you don't want to be. So that does limit the financing possibilities if you're trying to approach this from a position of conflict. But it's still possible to finance this even when you don't personally have a lot of money, although it can be more difficult. So the first method that you would look for to finance, particularly in this moment with all the uncertainty of COVID-19, is what I would call non-extractive debt financing. So this is not something that you're going to find from traditional banks. It's something that you would find from institutions that are normally built to lend for cooperative conversions. They give you a mix of what's called soft debt and working capital. Working capital is money that sort of gives you runway when you convert a business and you're having to figure out how to manage it and do all of this other stuff. It gives you runway to figure all of that out, and it can give you a little bit of time to weather this crisis and figure out what's going to happen. And soft debt is something that you can't get from a lot of institutions. Soft debt is debt that doesn't necessarily have mandatory terms of repayment. So you're not going to have to repay $10,000 a month or something like that. And if not, the business is taken back, you lose it. Instead, soft debt is repaid from, for example, the profits of the business, so that until the business makes money, you don't pay that loan, but you pay it when you can afford it. That is much more, you should be much more comfortable taking on that kind of debt than taking on hard debt, especially because we don't know how long this crisis is going to last. We don't know when revenues for businesses are going to be able to lift back up to the levels they were at before this crisis. Another form of financing that's often used in these conversions is employee equity. So you buy in a little bit to the business. That's obviously concerning if you need to use a lot of money to buy into a business right now and you don't have it. But that's okay because you can structure this buy-in as little or as much as you want. And you can make it small right now and then you can increase it in the future. So you could make it $100 right now, or even less, I think. I think it could be less. Or you could eventually make it something like $5,000 if you wanted to. You don't have to have that money on hand. It can be deducted from your paycheck over time too, but it doesn't have to be a lot coming out of your paycheck right at this moment. Although employee equity can be a good way to put down a down payment on a business, because it can often be a struggle to find that down payment money from outside lenders. Another way that you can get outside financing or financing for a down payment is by looking to crowdfunding. You may have seen many crowdfunding campaigns right now that are raising tens of thousands of dollars in a matter of weeks to bail out small businesses or for worker security, like worker relief funds. These funds are being raised in a way that if you look at past examples of crowdfunding to help tenants buy their buildings or to help workers buy businesses, this money is just getting raised more quickly right now. So if you are needing to find money quickly to put towards a down payment on a business, a crowdfunding campaign is not a bad idea right now. So you can sort of leverage the momentum of this particular moment to your benefit. And then I'll talk a little bit later about this strategy, reducing the price. That'll play a role in the later portion of this presentation, but that is something that you can do and is especially valuable when you're in a position where the owner is not likely to negotiate and give you really good terms on a business. And why is this a good thing to do right now? Sorry, I'm trying to move something on the screen. Okay, I did it. There we go. So right now, it's possible that a lot of businesses are soon going to begin closing. Businesses are going through a cash crisis right now. They don't have cash flow. The average business or the median business has only 27 cash buffer days, which means that if they completely run out of money, no money is coming in, they can only pay their outgoing expenses for 27 days until they have to shut down and liquidate. For certain types of businesses like restaurants, as you can see at the bottom of the screen, or retail, they have even fewer cash buffer days. So we saw, for example, in the last Great Recession in 2008, there was a wave of business closures. And this is even more unemployment. Businesses are having even less income right now. They're not able to go to the federal government and get the money they need because it's just not coming out in large enough quantities. They're not able to go to banks because banks have stopped lending a lot right now. And in the Bay Area, at least, where I am, we've been in a shelter in place for more than 27 days already. So if a business is making no money, there's a large probability that that business is not going to survive for much longer. And if a business has been able to preserve some income by keeping sort of a skeleton crew operating, it will expand those cash buffer days, but there's still a good possibility that it won't be able to weather the storm for much longer. So why would you do this? This is not an easy process. What are the benefits that this brings to you, and why would you consider this as something that you would want to do? One is that it gives you more control over your everyday life than you have probably had up until this point. We all exist sort of 9 hours a day, however long you're a day in a business, where a lot of times when you walk through the door, you lose a lot of the protections that you have, a lot of the rights that you have to say what you want, to do what you want. And you don't have a lot of control over your wages or how you operate. In a worker cooperative, that changes. You gain control over big picture decision making about the business. So if you want to start a new line of business, if you're a bakery and you want to start a flour making operation and you want to sell your flour too, you get to control those big picture decisions. You also get to control the everyday management. In a cooperative, and as you can see in this picture that now I'm seeing is a little bit blurry, you would be a member of the cooperative. You'd be part of the cooperative membership. So everybody has one vote. It's a one person, one vote principle. It's not based on money. And so you get to vote for the board of directors. Or in some co-ops, you are the board of directors. So you are the ones making those big decisions. Or it's just a sort of cross-section of your coworkers. And you also get to choose the management. That can be one of your coworkers that you all highly respect. It can be someone that you've hired from the outside, although I would caution against that because I've seen that go badly in a few conversions. And sometimes co-ops don't even have managers. You all just sort of figure out a way to manage yourselves. So that gives you something in your everyday life for many hours that you don't otherwise have. It also gives you the ability to control how, when things go wrong, they're handled. This is also somewhat blurry, I see. But in co-ops, you get to choose how you want to handle your grievances, how you want to mediate them. Your coworkers may be choosing the processes. You may be choosing those processes yourself if you're part of the board, but you're controlling how it happens. You're giving yourself a way to vent, giving yourself a way and a process to express those concerns. And you're also getting the money. In a traditional business, the owner is taking the profits off the top, and those profits are based on work that you're doing for the business. In a worker cooperative, everybody has money invested in the business, but the money you get out in terms of profits is based on the service that you provide to the business, not the amount of money you have invested in it. So if you're putting in more hours than somebody else, you're most likely making more money. So you're getting all that your labor is creating. Oops. Skip forward a second. Okay, here we are. So that's sort of a basic overview of cooperative conversion. I should probably do a more detailed overview of the actual mechanics in another webinar soon. So hold out for that. Maybe I'll do that. But in terms of this presentation, what I want to move towards is an analysis of really what are the legal rights and protections available to you as a worker in a business where you have not traditionally been treated well, to convert that business into a worker cooperative. To tell you about how the law works here, I need to give a little bit of historical context because there's a long history that leads up and informs the possibilities that are available to you in this moment. So this will be quick. It's not going to be a full-on history lesson, but I do think it's relevant. So really the first time you see full-blown, widespread advocacy for worker control in the United States is in the 1880s. So it's pretty soon into our history. This was during the Industrial Revolution, when everything that people knew about how the economy worked just sort of completely changed. It's a moment like right now where no one really knows what's happening and the rules of the game don't apply. And so anyone can step in and figure out a new way forward. The Knights of Labor were a labor union that stepped in and tried to figure out, what is this going to look like? What can the economy look like? They were a labor union that not only engaged in strikes, they also tried to exert democratic control over the entire economy. They wanted to create a lot of cooperatives. If people were striking, they would take those striking workers and let them form their own business. They would try to do whatever they could to transform the ownership of existing businesses. And they were able to create a ton of co-ops in the 1880s. Almost 300, which given the number of co-ops in the US today, which is like 800, I think, is an enormous number. But the reason that many people don't know about this and don't associate unions with the cooperative movement is because historically that type of activity by a union has been repressed, not only by the government, but also by other unions like the American Federation of Labor, which was formed from people that defected from the Knights of Labor and said, we don't want to be that radical. We don't want to advocate for a transition in ownership of the economy. They wanted to just keep the ownership of businesses as it was and advocate for better wages and things like that, but not fundamentally change things. So it's sort of, I find it strange to see the AFL-CIO, which is the modern version of the American Federation of Labor, still saying that it's the expression of the hopes and aspirations of the working people of America, when it was formed to suppress the hopes and aspirations of a large segment of the working people of America at that time. And really, after other labor unions began to suppress that type of activity, and after a few things happened in US history, it entered a dark period for labor in the early part of the 1900s. You have a lot of states passing what are called criminal syndicalism laws, which is a law that made it illegal to advocate for a change in industrial ownership. The law on its face said that it was illegal to advocate for a change by criminal means, by doing criminal acts, by sabotaging the workplace or using unlawful acts of force. But that wasn't what it was intended to do. It was intended to do much more, which meant that thousands of people were arrested just for talking about the idea of change in ownership or associating with others who talked about that. Basically, if you came to this presentation, you would probably been potentially arrested for criminal syndicalism at this time. Like this lady that was in fact not arrested for her terrible hat, but for advocating for criminal syndicalism. California passed this as a state of emergency because it said there was an existing evil in society led by the industrial workers of the world, which was a union that sort of took up the mantle of the Knights of Labor and tried to advocate across California for a widespread change in the ownership of industries. And what this led to was cooperatives having to be formed in a different way because of the way that the law was operating. So you saw cooperatives being formed within existing businesses during the Industrial Revolution, but then because of these laws that are aiming to suppress the formation of cooperatives within existing businesses, you see that during the next crisis, the Great Depression, co-ops start forming outside of existing businesses. You have hundreds of factories, hundreds of farms that are just bankrupt. No one's operating them. They're just sitting there not being used. But people aren't going and taking them over because they know that these laws are on the books. But people are forming their own co-ops and going and finding ways to get themselves the things that they need when they don't have the money to do it. And what it took at this time to bring back the issue of changes in ownership was someone running for governor, protected sort of from this kind of law, winning 40% of the vote on a platform for having the government buy out these factories and having the government buy out these farms and give them to the workers so that they could continue operating these things, which otherwise were just out of their hands. And this is where repression comes in again and prevents this kind of activity and suppresses it in American history, because this was in a way the first modern American political campaign, heavily bankrolled by rich folks that didn't want this to happen. So heavily bankrolled that the opponent of Upton Sinclair, who really had no name recognition, beat him just on the media recognition that he was able to get from that media effort. So again, when we hit the next change, when everything sort of goes up in the air and you have a political transformation and an economic transformation in the United States in the 60s and 70s, what happens and what most people will talk about is that there was a great escape from society. People were disaffected with their existing businesses, the existing way their life was structured. And while they gained that recognition on the job, they didn't transform their existing workplaces. They went and formed whole new places. They went and formed communes. They went and formed political media organizations aimed at speaking from outside existing businesses and existing news channels to the people. They formed free medical clinics instead of transforming existing medical centers. And this continues until we hit this strange point in 2008 during the Great Recession, where for the first time in a long, long time, workers organized within an existing business and took it over, kind of. So this is where the Great Recession is a very similar situation to where we are right now, in the sense that there was a massive bailout of the banks. The banks refused to help small businesses, and therefore small businesses started closing en masse. One of those was a window factory in Chicago, and the workers organized with their union and occupied the factory for almost 6 days to protest their firings. This is illegal. It's civil disobedience, but it picked up huge media recognition. People hated Bank of America. Obama talked about this on the news, and the workers earned back pay, and the factory was reopened, but not under their ownership, and it was quickly closed again. They were able to take it over through a bankruptcy sale, so not outright taking over the business, but only buying a portion of it. But what this started was sort of the resurgence of the interest in worker control leading to worker ownership. And so you have a lot of people that begin to pop up slowly that are interested in doing the type of work that I'm doing to help make this happen. But it's largely not happening through processes that exhibit conflict, like the origin story, like in New Era Windows. It's happening differently. So what that history brings up is one or two things. I mention it, one, to show that while this is not history that many of us learn in school, not ever really mentioned, it is there. And whenever we enter into periods like this, everything can possibly change. There are always these efforts, no matter if they're directed within existing industries or to flee existing industries and start your own sort of self-sufficient places. There are always these movements to change the way that our everyday economic life is structured. So there's hope in the fact that people are resilient and always want this in times like right now. But it also speaks to the way that doing what New Era Windows did, organizing within an existing business and taking it over, has been historically and repeatedly shut down legally in the United States, which means that when I, as an attorney, am scheduling this webinar, and part of it is about telling you what your legal options are and how you can convert a business as a worker, that what I'm telling you has to be informed by history. And frankly, it's a fairly somber story. You're not going to walk away from this with nothing, but you're going to walk away with the recognition of how difficult this landscape is, given the way that law has been structured in the United States. And that's okay, because this is one of my favorite books on how labor law should function and how workers should engage with the law in order to get what they want. It's a book called Labor Law for the Rank and Filer by some proponents of what's called solidarity unionism, which is a movement within the union movement to escape from sort of the bureaucratic unions that have historically suppressed democratic worker activity to achieve worker control. They say that the answer to getting what you want as a worker in the workplace is not to seek a legal solution. So your answer is not a lawsuit or anything like that. Your answer is using available legal protections to seek a solution through direct action. And direct action doesn't necessarily mean a legal action, which I think is what's often associated with direct action. It just means action that you are taking yourself, and you are taking it and you're trying to stick to the rules as much as you can to minimize the possible harm that can come to you and to maximize the gains that you're able to make. So that works exceptionally well when you're advocating for better wages in the workplace, or you're advocating for better working conditions in the workplace. But as you can probably guess from the history that I just gave, this strategy reaches somewhat of a breaking point when you begin to move from advocating for changes within the workplace to a total change of the structure of that workplace. So what you see is an almost wholesale lack of legal protections when you take that next step. For example, labor law protects you if you're advocating for wages, but if you're trying to protest the shutdown of your company, you don't want it to shut down, you want your union to step in and help you protest the shutdown of a company, which again, many companies are likely to shut down very soon. Labor courts have held that that is a determination, shutting a business down, that is at the core of entrepreneurial control, which means your union can't touch it, not legally. A union cannot direct a strike to protest a planned shutdown. It's just outside of what the law allows them to do. So not only can you not legally protest that, but you can't legally advocate for worker control as a solution to that kind of a shutdown. Section 7 of the National Labor Relations Act is the broadest and almost the best kept secret in labor law. It gives you the right, whether you're working with a union or not, to engage in concerted activity for mutual aid and protection, which is an incredibly expansive definition. However, it's not expansive enough to encompass advocacy for worker control through a worker buyout of a company. The National Labor Relations Board has held that this is because that kind of advocacy does not advance a worker's interest as a worker, but rather as an entrepreneur or an owner or a manager. Even though at the outset of this presentation, I said these categories blur when you get to the issue of worker ownership, they are not blurring for the courts. They are seeing it black and white. You either work in a business or you own a business. And if you try to cross that line, you're going to be pushed down every time. There's also a claim that somewhat like criminal syndicalism living on in another life, but just as a civil penalty rather than a criminal penalty. It's a claim called economic interference, which means that if you interfere in a sale or you interfere in a contract that your business has with the goal of taking those benefits for yourself, then you can be civilly liable for interfering in that, which is in a way what you are trying to do if you're advocating for worker control and your owner doesn't want you to do that. I think that there can actually be some openings there, but I don't want to go into that because I don't know yet. However somber and disappointing that introduction to the legal analysis is, this situation opens up new strategies. And by this situation, I mean the situation brought about by COVID-19, because it impacts sort of the teeth that are attached to actions that your employer can take. Even with existing labor protections, if you advocate for better wages, if you advocate for better working conditions, your employer can fire you. They don't have to provide notice. They don't have to give you a hearing. They can just fire you. All that's left to you from those protections is the ability to sue them for wrongfully terminating you. They don't protect you from being fired. But right now, the teeth are not gone, but millions of people have already been laid off. More layoffs are probably coming as businesses run out of cash and have to cut expenses more and more. So, in a word, your employer can fire you for taking these actions, but there's a high likelihood that those types of actions are coming down the pipeline anyway. That doesn't change the law, but it changes your risk analysis when you're approaching the strategies that you're willing to use. So this scenario has opened up new things. And I'm not going to leave you empty-handed, because I have been trying to figure out what is available to us in this moment. And just given the way that the law is structured right now, to advocate for a change in ownership of businesses. So I'm going to outline a 4-step strategy that I've been sort of thinking up. And yes, it has been in a way rushed to production because of this crisis, but I hope that it's helpful. Let me know afterwards. And this will continue to be developed over time, and hopefully with people that want to move it forward. But in essence, the 4 steps are: start early, organize with your coworkers, tell them you want to do this, talk to them about what co-ops are, and keep it secret so you don't get fired. Keep it secret for as long as possible until you enter a stage when you think it's okay to announce it, or you have enough leverage to do it without facing consequences. Second, make the business really hard to sell, which you are in a position to do. Third, find out when it's about to sell so that it doesn't just get sold under your feet without you knowing. And then if everything else fails, as you saw with New Era Windows, which is the factory in Chicago, you may have to do something that is not quite legal. That's historically been a large part of the fight for worker control, is engaging in civil disobedience and saying our society should be structured differently, and we're taking action because we believe that. So I'm going to go into a little more detail on what all of these mean. This is the first step, starting early. It means convincing your coworkers that co-ops are a great business form. It means talking to them about the basics of what a cooperative conversion looks like, how you can finance it when you don't have money on hand. It means going ahead and reaching out to people that provide technical assistance and can help you share that information with your coworkers. And it also means reaching out to lenders early, even if you don't have any plans formulated, just to let them know, hey, we're interested in this, keep us on your radar, and maybe they can help you figure out how much your business might be worth, give you a ballpark that you can talk about with your coworkers, so you can have sort of a more nuanced idea of what you're stepping into and how easy it might be to finance acquisition of some of the assets of this business or the whole business. That's an important element, because there's several ways that a business can shut down. Some of the processes take time. So if you look at what happened in Chicago in 2008, that was a bankruptcy proceeding, and it was a bankruptcy proceeding that was fairly lengthy, which meant that the workers, though they had already started advocating and organizing early with their other coworkers and their union and were ready, they had extra time in order to get financing together to buy some of the assets of that business. That's not always the case. And particularly in California, there's a process that many often prefer to bankruptcy that's called assignment for the benefit of creditors. How that works is that the business will continue operating up until basically the day that everything is auctioned off. So it's sort of the rug is swept completely out from under your feet. And if you don't have financing ready to go right then, it's not going to be possible to buy. I don't know how feasible it is to do that. It hasn't been tested doing it sort of on the fly. There's always been advance notice to the workers, but I'll talk in a minute about how to find out on your own and get sort of a guess that things are going to be moving soon. Second, it's just best practice to keep it as secret as possible as long as you can, not using company email accounts for sure. That's not even protected under normal labor law, and not talking about it on company time so no one finds out about it and can take action against you. You want to be as secret as you can, as long as you can. Second, you want to make it hard to sell the business using legal means. So, and also make it cheaper to buy for yourself when it comes down to it. A business becomes hard to sell for a number of reasons. One, small businesses are hard to sell in general. Only, I think it's 80% of small businesses don't actually sell, which is a huge number when you think about it, but there's just not a market for buying up small businesses. That of course depends on how small the business is. The smaller the business, probably the less likely it is to sell. But a business also becomes difficult to sell when it has too much debt. So someone doesn't want to buy it and maintain that debt because it's going to be hard to operate the business. And a business is also hard to sell when they can tell that you're going to be an unruly workforce and you're going to make life difficult for them. So there's a few things that you can do. One is you can file lawsuits. If you have legal lawsuits, if the owner has not treated you well and you have wage theft claims, or you have employment discrimination claims, or you have misclassification claims because they're treating you as an independent contractor when they should be treating you as a worker, you can file those claims. That business owner has to notify people that are going and interested in buying their business that there are existing lawsuits against that business. This matters more when the business owner tries to do what's called an entity sale than an asset sale. But in any case, it's still a valuable method to do early before you know that the business is for sale. Because even if it gives you leverage in any case. And if it goes all the way through, it will saddle the business with debt, which will make it harder for the business owner to sell it and potentially give you an opportunity to step in and buy. Other things that make a business cheaper and harder to sell include unionizing, because the new person that buys that business is going to have to engage with your collective bargaining agreement, pay you wages based on that. You don't have to fully unionize, though. Any action that you take under Section 7 of the National Labor Relations Act will show someone that's going to buy this business that you mean business, and that it's not going to be easy for them to step in, reorganize management, and keep you sort of a docile workforce. Third, the difficulty comes in finding out actually when a business is about to sell. Every guidebook that an owner looks at, a small business owner looks at when they're thinking about selling their business, tells them, do not tell your employees until the last possible second, and ideally, do not tell your employees at all until your business is sold. That's for a few reasons. One, if the owner tells you too early, you might leave because you don't want to exist under a new management scheme. You don't want to have to deal with a new owner. And a large part of the value of the business is tied to keeping key employees working at that business after the sale. So if they tell you too early, you might bail, and that lowers the value of the business and makes someone not want to buy it. So they wait until the last possible second to tell you. They do make information public, though. So for example, you see this listing on the left, which is for a business that's for sale in Berkeley, California. I'm not going to tell you who it is, but this is what online broker advertisements for small businesses look like. So if we have a wave of small businesses coming up, they might be advertising themselves online, and you can literally go in and set notifications for yourself to see when a business is coming online and it's about to go up for sale. And if you work in a business every day, you know the art on the wall, you know the layout of the chairs, you know that this is your business, even though they keep it completely anonymous and don't tell you the name. So you can figure out that way. Other things you can look for to know a business is about for sale and to know that you should really kick things into gear and start moving is, are attorneys coming into the business more often? Are you seeing them when you don't normally see them? Are you seeing accountants come into the business when you don't normally see them? Are you as employees being asked for to put together financial information for the owner or the manager or something like that? All of those things are signals that they're trying to get their stuff in order to turn around and begin to sell the business. So that lets you know that it's time to start moving. And then fourth, as I mentioned, the owner can just say, no, I don't want to sell it to you. That's what private property is, that someone doesn't have to give you something unless they want to give it to you. That's how candy bars work. They don't have to sell a candy bar to you unless you have the money that they want. Even then, they can turn you away, deny service to you. They don't have to sell it to you. That's how it works. So you have to exert pressure. You have to create leverage. You have to make them want to sell it to you. You have to make you and your group of workers their best option. And sometimes, as you see in these other cases, that involves taking action that you believe is right, that you believe should be legally allowed, even though it's not. That's what happens in New Era windows. That's what happened recently. You see that in the housing movement, particularly in advocacy for housing as a human right and not something that you have to buy, especially when thousands of people are homeless in the Bay Area. So you see activities like the Moms for Housing in Oakland, where homeless mothers occupied a home illegally for several days, and then gained the right to buy it because they had taken that step and created leverage. So the overall strategy is just prepare in advance, take any legal action you can to give yourself as much bargaining power as possible, lower the price you ultimately pay, and put yourself in a good position. And last resort is sort of civil disobedience. And then I'd be remiss not to note possibilities that are on the table now that weren't previously on the table because of the massive amount of unemployment that has been triggered by COVID-19. So labor law applies when you are a laborer. When you are no longer a laborer because you are unemployed, you're not subject to the same rules. You, in a way, gain more rights. You can say whatever you want, subject still, though, to some strings that are attached. So the danger now is not the danger of being fired, it's the danger of not getting rehired. So an employer can refuse to hire you for a number of reasons as long as they're not being discriminatory. And I'm fairly certain that they can refuse to rehire you for advocating for a worker buyout of their business. So that is still a danger, just because it prevents you from getting what you need. On unemployment insurance too, there are strings that are attached. You must apply for jobs and you must take any suitable job that is offered to you. Right now, that's not a big deal because people are not hiring again yet. So there's still not a lot of places to actually apply for jobs at the moment. Still, you're allowed to refuse any unsuitable employment. Unsuitability is based on a lot of things. If it's not in your industry, if the pay is incredibly low, but the pay can be low if the economy tanks. So people are going to be forced to take jobs that are significantly less well paying than the jobs that they left right now, which is not good. But one possibility is raised by another definition of unsuitability. In California, at least, a job is considered unsuitable if it's vacant directly due to a strike, a lockout, or another labor dispute, which brings up a possibility for expanding this effort for worker control in this current moment. Using this legal knowledge to the best effect requires sort of solidarity between people that are still employed and people that are unemployed. Basically, in order to give unemployed folks the best amount of leverage to advocate for buyouts of businesses, or to just not be employed by people that are trying to rehire and raise their revenue, which gives you, as employed people, better leverage to buy out the business, you have to engage in labor activity. You have to strike. You have to say, we're going to stick out because you are not providing enough protection from COVID-19 for us. We're not going to work. And if they fire you for that, everyone can refuse to take that position when it's offered, which puts that employer in a bad position and gives everyone more leverage. So taking that activity involves not only acting for worker control, but also doing what's below that and what is within the limits of that the law allows, which is taking direct action within legal protections to get what you want and to also help people that are out of the economy and in a vulnerable position get what they want. So that's all that I have. Thank you for listening to me talk at you for a very long time.
That was
And
amazing, Jay. Thank you for that. Let's see, do you want to continue recording the Q&A portion?
that's a good, I should probably cut it off just in case someone's name is mentioned. Let me see. Let me open up the controls again.